The radio crackled at 0347 hours, pulling Master Chief Gunnery Sergeant Reyes out of a dreamless sleep. Not the restless, turning kind of sleep that soldiers get before a patrol, but the deep, practiced unconsciousness of someone who had learned to store rest like ammunition. Measured, deliberate, never wasted. She was dressed and moving before the second burst of static cleared, her hands already reaching for her boots in the dark with the automatic precision of someone who had performed this ritual 10,000 times before. The base at Camp Lemonnier, Djibouti, never truly slept. There was always a generator humming somewhere, always the distant percussion of rotor blades chopping the desert air, always the smell of hydraulic fluid and jet exhaust mixing with the dry, ancient dust that coated everything east of the Red Sea. Sergeant First Class Elena Vasquez had spent enough time on this continent to recognize that smell in her sleep. Some soldiers never got used to it. She had stopped noticing it sometime around her fourth deployment, when places like this stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like another version of the same relentless mission. She was 34 years old. She stood 5 feet 6 inches tall, with a compact, economical build of someone who had spent her adult life carrying weight over long distances. Her hands were the most notable thing about her, not large, but precise, with calluses in specific places that any experienced shooter would recognize immediately. The pad of her right index finger, the heel of her right palm, the left thumb joint, worn smooth from thousands of hours behind a spotting scope. Her face was angular and serious, with dark eyes that moved constantly, cataloging everything in her field of vision with the same methodical patience she applied to everything else. She was not the kind of person who announced herself when she entered a room. She was the kind of person who knew exactly where every exit was before she sat down. The summons came from Tactical Operations Center Delta, which meant Commander Hargrove wanted everyone present and nobody happy about it. At 0347 in the morning, there was no such thing as good news. She walked across the compound under a sky that was thick with stars, the temperature already beginning its slow climb toward the 107-degree afternoon that the weather station had predicted. The TOC was a prefabricated structure with blast walls around 3 sides, lit from within by the blue-white glow of monitor screens that gave everyone inside the color of people who hadn't seen sunlight in several days. Commander Hargrove was standing at the central display table when she entered, his arms folded across his chest, his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was managing frustration poorly. Commander Dale Hargrove was built like someone had assembled him from surplus military equipment. 51 years old, 28 years of service, 4 combat deployments with SEAL Team 6 before a shrapnel injury to his left knee had redirected his career toward command. He was not the kind of officer who lost sleep over difficult missions. He had personally overseen 37 high-value target operations across 3 continents. What was keeping him up at nearly 4 in the morning was something different, and Vasquez could read it on his face before he said a single word. Standing around the display table were 15 other men, all of them senior enlisted or officer grade, all of them carrying the particular quiet competence of men who had spent significant time doing extremely dangerous things in extremely remote locations. She recognized most of them: Lieutenant Commander Park, Chief Petty Officer Dominguez, Senior Chief Calloway. She also recognized the way several of them glanced at her when she entered, the fractional pause in their conversations, the almost imperceptible recalibration that Satan people performed when someone unexpected walked into the room. She filed the observation away without reacting to it. She had been filing away observations like that for 12 years. Vasquez, Hargrove said, without preamble or pleasantry. "You're late. I was informed of this briefing 40 seconds ago, sir." She moved to an open position at the table without waiting to be directed. "The walk from my quarters takes 35 seconds. Something shifted in Hargrove's expression. Not quite amusement, not quite annoyance. He pointed at the satellite imagery displayed on the central screen. "We have a problem." The imagery showed a mountainous region of southern Afghanistan, near the Pakistani border, in a valley system that Vasquez recognized from her second deployment. The terrain there was brutal, all broken rock and deep shadow, with elevation changes that created wind patterns that changed direction 3 or 4 times over the course of a single kilometer. Snipers call terrain like that a lying landscape because it told you one thing and did another. The valley was approximately 9 kilometers long and between 800 meters and 3 kilometers wide, with ridgeline elevations ranging from 2,200 to 3,700 meters. High-value target, Hargrove continued, using a light pen to indicate a compound at the eastern end of the valley. Designation Kilo 7. Real name Farid al-Rashidi. He's the logistical architect behind 3 major attacks in the past 18 months. Coordinates the movement of material, personnel, and financing across the border. We have had 17 separate opportunities to neutralize this target in the past 4 years, and every single one has fallen apart due to operational compromise, technical failure, or target movement. He paused to let that number settle. 17. He moves between 3 compounds, Lieutenant Commander Park said, taking over the briefing with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it. We've been tracking his pattern for 6 weeks. He's predictable on one thing and one thing only, his morning prayer. Every morning, regardless of location, he steps into an open courtyard facing east at approximately 0615 local. He's in the open for roughly 12 minutes. That's our window. Vasquez studied the compound. What's the distance from the nearest viable height? The room went quiet in a way that told her the answer before anyone said it. Hargrove pulled up a topographic overlay. A red line extended from the compound to a ridge line on the western side of the valley. The distance measurement displayed in the corner of the screen read 4,218 meters. Nobody spoke for a moment. 4,218 meters, Park said. The only viable approach line that doesn't compromise the exfil corridor. Anything closer puts the extraction team in a crossfire position with the secondary guard element here. He indicated a fortified position 800 meters south of the compound. The terrain between the ridge and the compound is open. There's no concealment route under 3,000 meters. Chief Petty Officer Dominguez cleared his throat. The current confirmed world record for a combat sniper engagement is 3,871 meters. Canadian Special Forces, 2017, Afghanistan. I'm aware of the record, Hargrove said. So, 4,218 meters is 347 meters beyond the confirmed maximum effective range of any sniper system currently deployed by any military force on Earth. I said I'm aware of the record. Dominguez looked at the screen, then at the commander, and said nothing else. Around the table, several of the men exchanged glances that communicated a complete conversation in under a second. It was the specific language of experienced soldiers evaluating whether an order was the product of necessity or desperation. Hargrove swept his gaze around the table. I need a shooter. Someone who can take that shot. He paused. I've already run 15 of our top snipers through the preliminary ballistic assessment on this one. Every single one of them declined the engagement. He said it flatly, without judgment, because in his experience, a shooter who honestly assessed their limitations was worth 10 times more than a shooter who lied about them. Not because they were unwilling, because the math doesn't work for their equipment configuration and current skill set. He looked at Vasquez. Then your name came up. Several heads turned. The quality of attention in the room changed. From who? Vasquez asked. Colonel Jameson. He said I should talk to you before I make any other decisions. Hargrove's tone was carefully neutral. The tone of a commander who had been told something he wasn't sure he believed and was waiting for evidence to make up his mind. He used the phrase consult her as a priority. He didn't elaborate. Vasquez looked at the screen. Her eyes moved across the topographic display with the specific, methodical pattern of someone reading terrain the way a musician reads sheet music, not word by word, but in phrases, in structures, in patterns that told a larger story. She tracked the ridgeline elevation, the valley geometry, the compound placement, the estimated atmospheric conditions for that altitude and region at that time of year. She was not doing this for performance. She was doing it because this was simply how she processed information. What's the elevation differential? She asked. Firing position at 3,340 meters, Park said. Target at 2,890 meters. You're shooting downhill at a 4.7-degree angle. Wind data for the valley at 0600. Variable. 2 to 14 kilometers per hour, predominantly southwest to northeast, but the valley creates channel effects we can't fully model. The terrain analysis shows at least 3 distinct wind zones between the ridge and the compound. Temperature. Projected 12 degrees Celsius at the firing position at time of shot. Compound elevation will be approximately 9 degrees. Vasquez nodded once, still studying the screen. Then she said, "What rifle platform are you currently proposing?" Hargrove hesitated for just a moment. "What would you want?" She looked at him directly for the first time. "My system." "Which is?" "Che Attack M200 Intervention. 308 caliber conversion is wrong for this distance. I run it in 408 Che Attack. 29-inch Lilja barrel. Nightforce Attica 7-35x56 with a custom turret calibration I had built at the NRL Precision Facility in Fort Benning 2 years ago." She paused. "The turret calibration is built around my specific bullet lot. I run a ballistic coefficient of 0.305 G7, which is approximately 8% higher than the factory 305-grain solid brass bullet, because I'm using a modified projectile profile. The difference at 4,000 meters is about 4 to 7 centimeters of vertical drop." The room was completely silent now. The kind of silence that a certain type of statement produces. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of people recalibrating their understanding of a situation. Chief Petty Officer Dominguez turned his head and looked at Vasquez with an expression that had changed completely from the one he'd worn 30 seconds earlier. Lieutenant Commander Park had stopped moving entirely, his pen resting motionless on the table. Commander Hargrove was watching her with the focused attention of a man who had just heard something that surprised him, and who was not accustomed to being surprised. "You've done the ballistic calculation," Hargrove said. It was not quite a question. "I've been tracking this valley system since my second deployment in 2016, Vasquez said. "The atmospheric conditions, the terrain geometry, the wind patterns. Not for this target specifically, but the ballistics for a 4,000-plus meter engagement in this valley have been in my field notes for 6 years. I run hypothetical distance calculations on complex terrain as a practice discipline." She paused. "I've also been following Al-Rashidi's pattern reports in the intelligence summaries. I recognized the compound when I saw the satellite imagery." Hargrove stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Can you make that shot?" The room waited. Vasquez looked at the topographic display, at the red line stretching 4,218 meters across a hostile valley in one of the most remote and dangerous regions on the planet, at a target that had evaded capture or elimination for 4 years, at a distance that exceeded every verified combat engagement in the history of military sniper operations. "I need to see my meteorological data for the past 30 days over that valley," she said. "I need a soil composition report for the firing position substrate, because I need to calculate rifle platform stability and vibration transmission. I need the most current atmospheric projections for the morning of the mission window. And I need 48 hours of uninterrupted preparation time." She looked at Hargrove. "And I need Sergeant Martinez as my spotter." "Martinez is assigned to." "I know where Martinez is assigned. I need Martinez as my spotter." Another pause. Hargrove looked at her, then at the screen, then back at her. Then he said, "You'll have everything you asked for within 6 hours. Martinez will be here by 1400. He straightened. "The mission window opens in 7 to 2 hours. Al-Rashidi has been in this compound for 9 days. Intelligence estimates he moves again in 4 to 6 days. If we miss this window, it's gone." He looked around the table. Questions? Nobody had questions. Or rather, they had many questions, but none of them were for the commander. The 48 hours that followed existed in a kind of compressed time that only preparation produces, not the anxious, restless time of waiting, but the dense, purposeful time of building something complicated by hand. Vasquez had a process, and the process was not dramatic. It was not the kind of thing that translated well into stories, because it was largely invisible from the outside. It was thought, calculation, measurement, and adjustment, repeated until the margin of error was as small as she could make it. Sergeant First Class Marcus Martinez was 31 years old, With 4 combat deployments and a spotter qualification that Vasquez had personally evaluated 3 years earlier at the Special Operations Sniper School at Fort Bragg. He was one of 12 spotters she had trained over the course of her career who she would actually trust behind a scope at extended ranges. He arrived at Camp Lemonnier at 1,347 hours, dropped his kit bag at the door of the preparation room, looked at the topographic display that Vasquez had already covered with data annotations, and said, "Talk to me." 4,218 meters, she said, without turning from the table. Martinez was quiet for a moment. "Is that a confirmed measurement or an estimate?" "Confirmed. LiDAR survey data from a reconnaissance overflight conducted 6 weeks ago. Margin of error is plus or minus 11 meters. Downhill. 4.7 degrees. What's the A density at the firing position?" "That's what I'm working on right now." She pointed to the stack of meteorological data printouts on her left. "Sit down. We have a lot to do." Martinez sat down. He picked up the first printout, scanned it, and said nothing. They worked together in the practiced quiet of people who had spent a great deal of time doing complex things in close proximity. Their communication was largely functional. Questions, data points, confirmations, adjustments. They had developed, over years of working together on and off, the kind of working shorthand that reduced misunderstanding to near zero. When Vasquez said check the humidity deviation across the valley floor, Martinez didn't ask why. He already knew why. The ballistic calculation for a 4,218-meter shot is not a single calculation. It is a chain of interdependent calculations, each one affecting the next, each one carrying a margin of error that compounds as the chain extends. At 1,000 meters, a small miscalculation in wind estimation produces an error measured in centimeters. At 4,000 meters, the same miscalculation, running through a chain of compounding effects, can produce an error measured in meters. The bullet Vasquez was planning to fire, a 305-grain solid brass projectile moving at approximately 900 meters per second at the muzzle, would be in the air for approximately 4.8 seconds before reaching the target. In those 4.8 seconds, it would be subject to gravity, the Coriolis effect of the Earth's rotation, atmospheric density variations across altitude changes, the Magnus effect of its own spin, and at least 3 distinct wind zones with different speeds and directions. The cumulative effect of all these variables, if not correctly calculated and compensated for, was the difference between a successful shot and a bullet that impacted somewhere in the valley floor 60 meters from the intended point. Vasquez did not find this intimidating. She found it interesting. She had been finding it interesting since she was 16 years old, when her father, a retired Army Ranger who had done 3 tours in Vietnam and spent the rest of his life teaching himself about everything he'd never had time to learn during those tours, had taken her to a shooting range in rural Montana and handed her a .308 Winchester bolt-action rifle with the casual confidence of a man who had never once in his life doubted his daughter's capability. By the time she was 18, she was shooting sub-half MOA groups at 800 meters with factory ammunition. By the time she was 22, in her first year of active service after enlisting in the Army over the protest of 2 college acceptance letters, she had already begun developing the methodological approach that would define her entire career. The approach was simple to describe and extraordinarily difficult to execute. Vasquez believed that extreme long-range shooting was fundamentally a data problem. Every shot was the output of a system, and the quality of the output was limited by the quality of the data fed into the system. The data was everything. The exact ballistic coefficient of the specific bullet from the specific production lot, confirmed through chronograph testing and long-range group analysis. The precise barrel harmonic profile of the specific rifle, charted through vibrational analysis across multiple temperature ranges. The exact atmospheric conditions of the firing position, at the midpoint of the trajectory, and at the target, not estimated, but measured or calculated with the highest available precision. The elevation, angle, and environmental variables at every point the bullet would pass through. The shooter's own physiological state, which affected trigger pull, breath control, and platform stability in ways that were small but measurable and therefore manageable. Most shooters learned these principles. Vasquez had taken them further than almost anyone in the operational military. She had published 2 technical papers in the Special Operations Forces Academic Journal, both under classification that meant almost nobody outside a specific community had read them. She had redesigned her personal ranging protocol from scratch, incorporating atmospheric physics modeling that the standard military ballistic calculators didn't account for. She had collaborated with a physicist at the Naval Postgraduate School on a study of Coriolis effect compensation at extreme distances, a study that had changed the way 3 different sniper schools taught their advanced courses. None of the men standing around the TOC table at 0347 that morning had known any of this when she walked in. Some of them were beginning to suspect it now, as word moved through the camp in the way that information always moved through military units, not through official channels, but through the lateral networks of people who talked to people who had heard things. Chief Petty Officer Dominguez appeared at the preparation room door at 1600 hours with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested he was there for reasons he hadn't entirely worked out yet. Vasquez didn't look up from the ballistic table she was annotating. "You need something, Chief." "Brought coffee." He set 1 cup near her elbow and remained in the doorway. "Thought you might not have had time." "I've had time." She picked up the cup anyway, because it was offered in good faith and she had learned that declining hospitality in operational context created unnecessary friction. "Something else." Dominguez leaned against the doorframe. He was a large man, broad through the shoulders, with a specific kind of physical stillness that experienced shooters develop. Not tension, but readiness. He had been a sniper himself, qualified to 2,000 meters, before a wrist injury had moved him to other specialties. He looked at the annotated charts on the wall behind her and was quiet for a moment. "I made that comment in the briefing. About the record distance." "I know. I want you to know I wasn't. I wasn't saying you couldn't do it. I know what you were saying. It was an accurate statement." She looked at him briefly. "The current confirmed record is 3,871 meters. You were right. But you think you can beat it by 347 meters. I don't think anything yet. I'm still doing the preliminary analysis. If the numbers don't work, I'll say so." She went back to the charts. "I don't have an ego investment in making this shot. I have an investment in knowing whether it's possible. If it's possible, I'll make it. If it's not, I'll tell Commander Hargrove before he puts a team on that hillside." Dominguez nodded slowly. He looked at the trajectory calculations visible on the open laptop screen. He was quiet long enough that Vasquez had almost moved past the interaction and back into her calculations when he said, "What's your longest confirmed shot? If you don't mind my asking." She looked up. "Under what operational conditions?" "Any. I need to check my range log for the exact figures. But somewhere between 3,800 and 4,000 meters. Confirmed impact, training exercise. I don't count it as a record because it wasn't a combat engagement and I couldn't verify atmospheric data to the standard I require." Dominguez was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "Is there anything you need from me?" "Not right now, but I'll probably need someone to run a secondary wind check at the valley floor level before the mission window. If you're available, I'll make myself available." He straightened away from the doorframe. The offer of coffee stands. Multiple times. After he left, Martinez looked up from the meteorological data he'd been analyzing. "Here's a good one," he said. "I know," Vasquez said. "Most of them are, once they decide to be." The preparation room became a world of its own over the next 36 hours. The walls were covered in topographic printouts, atmospheric data charts, wind pattern analyses, and the elaborate calculation sheets that Vasquez filled in by hand rather than digitally, because she trusted the process of manual calculation to catch errors that automated systems glossed over. The rifle was disassembled and reassembled 3 times, each time with measurements and checks that Martinez recorded in a field log that would eventually run to 4 to 7 pages. The Che Attack M200 intervention is, by any reasonable measure, not a weapon system designed for general military use. It weighs 13 kilograms unloaded, with a barrel length of 29 inches and an overall length of nearly 1.5 meters. It is a precision instrument designed around a single purpose, delivering a projectile to a point target at distances that would have been considered impossible by the shooting community a generation ago. Vasquez had owned this specific rifle for 7 years. She had hand-fitted the stock to her specific body geometry, adjusting the length of pull to within a millimeter of her optimal position. She had mapped the barrel's harmonic vibration pattern across 18 different ammunition lots and 4 temperature ranges, and had used that data to optimize her hand-load ammunition to match the specific node at which the barrel was most stable at the moment of projectile departure. She was not precious about the rifle. She did not name it, or treat it as anything other than a precision instrument that required precise maintenance. But she understood it the way a surgeon understands a specific scalpel, not with sentiment, but with an intimate, functional knowledge that made it an extension of her capability rather than a separate object. On the second evening of preparation, Lieutenant Commander Park came to the preparation room with the updated intelligence package. He spread the photographs across the work table, high-resolution imagery from the most recent overflight, showing the compound in fine detail. The courtyard where al-Rashidi conducted his morning prayer was clearly visible, a space approximately 12 meters by 8 meters, open to the sky, bounded on 3 sides by low walls and on the 4th by the main structure of the compound. Has been consistent? Vasquez asked, studying the imagery. Every morning for the past 9 days. Same position, facing east. He stays between 6 and 14 minutes, depending on what appears to be a variable in the prayer duration. Park pointed to a specific location within the courtyard. Based on the shadow analysis and his positioning in the 3 observation windows we've had, we're estimating his point of prayer at approximately this location. That's your target point. Vasquez studied it. She measured distances within the imagery, cross-referencing with the topographic data. She was looking at the problem the way she always looked at complex problems, not as a single challenge to be solved, but as a collection of interdependent variables to be understood individually and then reconciled into a unified solution. The window, she said, 12 minutes, starting at approximately 0615. What's the margin on that start time? Plus or minus 8 minutes, based on historical observation. So he could appear as early as 0607 or as late as 0623. Correct. She noted this in her calculation log. The window affected the atmospheric projections, because temperature and therefore air density in that valley changed measurably over that time frame. An 8-minute range required atmospheric calculations for each endpoint and interpolation across the window. It was not a complication, exactly, but it was another variable to carry. The secondary guard position, she said, 800 meters south. What's their patrol pattern? They run a rotation every 40 minutes. There's a 7-minute gap in their observation of the southern approach route during the middle of each rotation. That's when the approach team would need to move. I'm not concerned about the approach team. I'm concerned about the response time after the shot. If they hear the sonic boom of the bullet or the distant report. At 4,218 meters, the sound attenuation is significant. Our acoustic analysis puts the likely audible range of the shot at under 800 meters under standard atmospheric conditions. They'll hear something, but not a distinct shot. And reaction time from compound to guard position. Under normal movement, 4 to 6 minutes. The exfil corridor stays clean for how long after target acquisition? Extraction team can be to pick up in under 20 minutes from shot confirmation. Vasquez made several additional notes. Then she looked up at Park, who had been watching her work through this with the expression of someone watching a chess player evaluate a complex position. He was in his mid-40s, a Naval Academy graduate, precise and intelligent, and one of the better operational planners she had encountered. He had not said anything about her presence in the briefing, had not looked at her in the fractional pause way that several of the others had. She suspected he had done his reading before the briefing. Vasquez, he said quietly, I want you to know something. She waited. I've been planning operations for 18 years. I've worked with a lot of shooters. He paused. When Hargrove said your name had come up from Colonel Jameson, I went and pulled your file before the briefing. I know. I saw you talking to the S2 officer at 0200. He absorbed this without visible surprise. Then you know I know about Cuna Province. Vasquez said nothing for a moment. Then she said, that engagement isn't in any file that requires intelligence-level access. Colonel Jameson told me about it personally. He said I should understand who I was working with. Park paused. He said you saved a 6-man reconnaissance element that was pinned down by a firing position that had held them for 11 hours. He said you engaged from a distance that the after-action report recorded as approximately 3,600 meters in failing light in a wind condition that the meteorological record described as highly adverse. The after-action report distance was an estimate. I measured it afterward at 3,718 meters. The men from that team talk about that shot. They should talk about the intelligence failure that put them in that position in the first place, Vasquez said. That's what needed fixing. Park almost smiled. That's what Jameson said you'd say. He gathered the intelligence photographs. I want this to succeed. Everything I can do to support you, I'm doing it. After he left, Martinez looked up from his meteorological charts. Cuna Province, he said. That was your deployment in 2019. Yes. You never told me it was 3,718 meters. I told you it was a long shot. That's a significant understatement. It solved the problem, she said. That's all it needed to do. On the morning before the mission window, Commander Hargrove came to the preparation room alone, without the entourage of staff officers that usually accompanied him. He came early, before 0600, while Martinez was at the mess hall and Vasquez was working through her final atmospheric projection calculations. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at the walls covered in charts and calculations, at the disassembled rifle components laid out on the cleaning mat, at the organized complexity of a problem being systematically dismantled. Vasquez, he said. Commander. She didn't look up immediately. 14 minutes, sir. I'm at a point in the calculations where I need to finish this sequence before I stop. Take your time. He waited. She worked through the sequence. The density-altitude projection for the ridge firing position at 0615 hours, adjusting for the overnight temperature drop and the morning thermal heating gradient, cross-referencing with the atmospheric moisture data, entering the corrected values into the trajectory model. When she reached the end of the sequence, she noted the final figures in her calculation log and turned to face him. Hargrove looked at the trajectory calculations visible on the screen behind her. His expression was the expression of a man who was used to making decisions about things he understood completely and who was now working to understand something outside his previous experience. He was honest enough not to pretend otherwise. I owe you an apology, he said. Vasquez waited. When Colonel Jameson gave me your name, my first reaction wasn't what it should have been. He paused. My first reaction was that Jameson was working some kind of personnel angle, sending me someone because of a quota or political consideration, not because she was the right person for the mission. That's a reasonable concern, Vasquez said, given how those decisions are sometimes made. It's not a reasonable concern when it's based on a reflex rather than an assessment. I didn't assess your record before that briefing. I should have. He looked at the charts again. I've been going through your record for the past 2 days. I read the Cuna Province report. I read the NRL Precision Facility Evaluation, where the supervising instructor wrote that your ballistic analysis methodology should be incorporated into the standard advanced sniper curriculum. I read your 2 published papers. They are classified. I have clearance. Vasquez, he stopped. Started again. I want to tell you something that I'm going to say once and then not repeat, because I'm aware of how this kind of statement can sound patronizing from a commander to someone in your position. She waited with the same patience she applied to everything. I've been wrong about a lot of things in 28 years, Hargrove said. The ones I regret most are the times when I let my assumptions do my assessment work for me. This is one of those times, except that I caught it early. He looked directly at her. I caught it early because of you. Because the way you walked into that briefing, the way you looked at that screen, the way you asked exactly the right questions in exactly the right order, that told me something that my assumptions should have already told me. I'm sorry I needed the demonstration. Vasquez held his gaze for a moment. With respect, sir, the mission outcome is what matters, not my credentialing process. Both matter. Yes, she conceded. But only one of them is actionable at 0600 hours the day before a mission window. Something in Hargrove's expression shifted, a very slight relaxation around the eyes, a fractional lowering of the set of his jaw. It was the expression of a man who had just had a specific concern addressed, and who was now ready to move forward without it. "What's your confidence level?" he asked. Vasquez turned and looked at the trajectory calculation on the screen. She looked at it for a long moment, the way she always looked at a completed calculation, not to verify it, because she had already verified it multiple times, but to simply acknowledge it as finished. Then she turned back to Hargrove. "The shot is geometrically possible," she said. "The atmospheric conditions projected for 0615 tomorrow morning are within the envelope where I can make accurate compensations. The wind data across the valley is complex, but I've modeled 5 scenarios and developed firing solutions for each one. I know this rifle, this ammunition, and this trajectory geometry to a degree of precision that I believe gives me a viable probability of first-round impact." "What probability?" She paused. "If conditions are as currently projected, and the environmental variables don't deviate significantly from my models during the shooting window, I estimate a 68% probability of first-round impact within the target's vital zone." Hargrove held her gaze. "And if conditions deviate, then I reassess and adjust. The probability changes with the conditions. That's why Martinez and I will have been on that ridge for 3 hours before the window opens. The most important data I'll have is the data I collect on-site, in real time." Hargrove nodded slowly. "If you need a second shot." "Every second shot in this environment is a diminishing probability. Al-Rashidi will have moved from the prayer position within 4 seconds of any shot impact, whether successful or not. His security detail will have him inside the structure in under 8 seconds. But the primary target geometry changes significantly after first shot." She paused. "The preference is 1 shot. That's always the preference." "Understood." Hargrove straightened. "The team is ready. Transport to the insertion point is confirmed. Your equipment package was cleared by logistics at 1800 last night. Is there anything else you need?" Vasquez considered. "Tell Martinez to get more sleep than he thinks he needs. He has a tendency to stay up running calculations when he should be resting." For the first time, Hargrove's expression shifted into something that might have been a very small smile. "I'll pass that along." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. "Vasquez, for what it's worth, I'm glad Jameson called." After he left, Vasquez turned back to her calculations. She pulled up the atmospheric projection one more time, not because she needed to, but because in the hours before a mission, repetition was not anxiety. It was the systematic reduction of uncertainty to the smallest possible margin. She looked at the numbers. She adjusted a single coefficient in the density-altitude calculation where the most recent upper atmosphere data had returned a slightly different reading than the previous day's projection. The adjustment changed the vertical hold correction by a third of a click. She noted it in the log. The valley was cold before dawn in a way that was different from the cold of open desert. It was a trapped cold, heavy with the stone and ice smell of high-elevation terrain, pressing down from the ridgelines into the valley floor where it pooled like water. The insertion team had moved in silence for 3 hours through terrain that required hands and feet in places, carrying equipment loads that would have been challenging on level ground. Vasquez moved with the same deliberate economy she applied to everything, conserving energy and maintaining exact footfall placement, because in terrain this broken, an ankle injury was not inconvenience. It was mission failure. They reached the firing position, designated Overwatch Alpha in the mission brief, at 0312 hours. It was a natural rock shelf approximately 40 meters below the ridgeline crest, providing cover from the ridgeline while maintaining an unobstructed line of sight to the target compound 4,218 meters to the east. Vasquez had studied the position from satellite imagery so thoroughly that it felt familiar, even in darkness. The rock beneath them was cold granite, fractured by freeze cycles, with a surface that provided good rifle platform stability as long as weight distribution was carefully managed. Martinez set up the spotting scope on its tripod with the efficiency of a man who had done this particular task more times than he could count. He locked in the elevation, adjusted the azimuth, and took his first look through the optic at the darkened compound far below. "Target position is cold," he murmured into his throat. "MIC, no movement. Lights are out in the main structure." "Copy," Vasquez said. She was laying out her equipment with the same methodical precision, rifle on its bipod and rear rest, adjusted for the downhill angle, secured to the rock surface beneath her with small stabilizing wedges that she had prepared and packed specifically for this position. She checked the scope mounting torque, the barrel-to-stock bedding contacts, the trigger pull. She ran her glove hand along the barrel, feeling for any temperature-induced stress in the metal that might affect harmonics. Everything was as it should be. For the next 2 hours, they measured Martina's red wind data from 3 different microweather stations that had been pre-positioned in the valley by a reconnaissance element 2 days earlier. The stations reported conditions at the valley floor, at mid-elevation, and at a point 800 meters from the compound. Vasquez logged every reading, updating her ballistic model as the data came in, adjusting her firing solutions for the actual conditions rather than the projected ones. At 0500 hours, the valley was reading a surface wind of 7 km per hour from the southwest, a mid-elevation wind of 11 km per hour with a northward deflection, and a near-target wind of approximately 4 km per hour with no consistent direction, an eddy condition caused by the compound's position near the valley wall. The Coriolis correction for this latitude and distance, shooting northeasterly, was approximately 1.3 meters of right deflection. The spin drift of the projectile added another 0.7 meters of right deflection over the full distance. The combined wind compensation for the 3 wind zones had to be computed as a weighted average based on the distance fraction each zone occupied in the total trajectory, an approach that Vasquez had developed herself and that differed significantly from the standard military ballistic manual approach. At 0545 hours, the first hint of dawn appeared above the eastern ridgeline as a barely perceptible lightening of the darkness, the kind of light that only shows itself if you're looking for it. The temperature at the firing position was 11 degrees Celsius, 1 degree below the projected value, which required a small adjustment to the density-altitude calculation. Vasquez made the adjustment in her head and verified it against her manual calculation before entering it into the firing solution. Target compound beginning to show activity, Martinez said quietly. Light in the main structure, lower right window. Movement visible, single figure. Copy. 0551 hours. We're inside the window. Vasquez settled behind the rifle. She did this without drama or ceremony, simply moving into position with the same deliberate efficiency she brought to everything, aligning her eye behind the scope, adjusting her position so that the natural point of aim fell precisely on the predetermined target point in the courtyard, using the rifle as a navigation tool rather than forcing the aim. Natural point of aim. No muscle tension fighting the rifle's preferred direction. She would come back to this position again and again in the next 20 minutes, maintaining it through patience rather than effort. The courtyard is still empty. The light in the window is artificial. Someone is awake, moving through the morning preparation that precedes prayer. She didn't think in those terms exactly. It was less verbal, more sensory, a constellation of observations processed simultaneously below the level of language. The compound was waking up. The target was in there. The physics of what was about to happen were as fixed and immutable as any physical law, as certain as gravity, as predictable as light. The only variable was human. Whether she could read the wind correctly, breathe correctly, squeeze correctly, hold correctly, in the space of a few seconds that contained no possibility of revision. She found her heartbeat in the scope reticle. She watched it, acknowledged it, and began the process of slowing it. Not through effort, through the opposite of effort, through the release of everything that was not necessary. She had been doing this since she was 16 years old, in a shooting bay in Montana with her father standing 2 steps behind her. She had never stopped doing it. It had become the most reliable path she knew to the state of absolute present-moment attention that extreme long-range shooting required. Not concentration, exactly, but the cessation of everything that was not the shot. 0603, Martinez murmured. Courtyard gate is opening. The courtyard gate opened inward, swinging on hinges that, at 4,218 meters, produced no sound that could reach the ridge. Everything at this distance was silent and removed, observed through glass and mathematics, translated from the tactile world of wind and dust and cold granite into the geometric world of angles and calculations and minute adjustments measured in fractions of a millimeter. Vasquez watched the gate open and registered it as information. Nothing more. Her heartbeat had settled to 4 beats per minute, confirmed by the almost imperceptible pulse she could feel in the pad of her trigger finger. Single figure entering the courtyard, Martinez said, his voice flat and informational, stripped of everything except data. Male. Approximate height consistent with target description. White dish dasher, gray overgarment. Moving to the eastern section of the courtyard. A pause of 3 seconds. Is setting his prayer rug. Copy. Vasquez made a single micro-adjustment to her elevation turret. 1/8 of a click, the smallest increment her custom turret permitted, based on the updated near-target wind reading that Martinez had transmitted from the valley floor station 40 seconds earlier. The adjustment moved her point of impact by approximately 9 centimeters at the target distance. She had debated this adjustment for the past 4 minutes. The wind at the compound was currently reading 2 kilometers per hour, nearly calm, but the eddy pattern she had observed over the previous 2 hours suggested intermittent gusts of 4 to 6 kilometers per hour occurring at irregular intervals of between 90 seconds and 4 minutes. If one of those gusts hit during the bullet's 4.8-second flight time, its effect on the trajectory would depend entirely on when during the flight it occurred. She had modeled this. She had made her decision about how to weight it. The 8th-click adjustment stayed. Figure is stationary. Eastern portion of the courtyard. Confirmed position matches predicted target point within approximately 1 meter. Martinez paused. Comparing with imagery. Build is consistent. Movement pattern is consistent. Physical posture consistent with intelligence description. Confirmation on identification. A longer pause. Martinez was checking everything he could check from 4,218 meters through a spotting scope in the growing pre-dawn light. At this distance, facial feature confirmation was not possible. Identification had to be inferred from a convergence of behavioral and physical indicators. Location, timing, physical description match, behavioral pattern match, and context. All indicators consistent. Confidence level high. Commander Park is monitoring from the TOC, standby. The radio in Vasquez's EPs produced a short tone. Then Park's voice, clipped and precise. TOC confirms activity consistent with target behavioral pattern. Secondary identification support. Thermal analysis from the platform overhead shows single adult male consistent with target biometrics. You are cleared to engage. Time now 0608. Target is in the open. Copy, Vasquez said. Engaging. She did not say it dramatically. She said it the way she said everything in this state, with the minimum number of words required to communicate the necessary information, without tone, without ceremony. She settled the reticle on the target point and remained perfectly still. The figure in the courtyard, 4,218 meters away, had positioned himself facing east, toward where the sky was beginning to change from black to the deep, atmospheric blue that preceded dawn in high-altitude desert terrain. He was facing the light. He had no knowledge that he was being observed. He had no knowledge of the rifle, the calculations, the woman lying in absolute stillness on a rock shelf he couldn't have seen from his position, the mathematics that had been constructed around this moment over 72 hours of preparation. He existed in a completely separate reality from the one converging on him, and the gap between those two realities would close in approximately 4.8 seconds. Vasquez breathed in, breathed out, half in, and held. The wind across the valley floor was reading 7 kilometers per hour southwest. Mid-elevation was showing 9, steady. The near target station had just cycled its reading, 2.3 kilometers per hour, still in the eddy. The atmospheric density altitude at the firing position was 3,342 meters adjusted. The temperature differential between firing position and target added 0.4% to muzzle velocity projection. The Coriolis deflection for this latitude, this azimuth, and this distance was 1.31 meters right. The spin drift was 0.68 meters right. Combined with her wind compensation, her total right correction was dialed in. The elevation correction for the total drop over 4,218 meters of downhill geometry, adjusted for density, altitude, and temperature gradient, was entered. Every variable that could be calculated had been calculated. Every adjustment that could be made had been made. What remained was the shot. She felt her heartbeat, counted the space between beats, found the stillness in that space, the fraction of a second when the cardiovascular system produces its minimum mechanical movement, when the chest is neither expanding nor contracting, when the body is as close to motionless as a living body can be. She timed the trigger press to begin in that space. The reticle is steady. The crosshair intersection is where it needs to be. The wind is holding. This is the moment. The trigger broke at 4 pounds, 3 ounces, exactly as it had been set and confirmed 3 times before departure. The firing pin fell. The primer ignited. The powder charge burned in 1.2 milliseconds, generating a chamber pressure of 62,000 psi that accelerated the 305-grain solid brass projectile down a 29-inch barrel and out into the cold pre-dawn air at 2,950 feet per second. The rifle moved. The muzzle brake redirected the propellant gases, reducing the rearward impulse by approximately 40%. Vasquez rode the recoil without fighting it, maintaining her position behind the scope through the movement, recovering immediately to her sight picture. She did not look for impact confirmation. Martinez would do that. Her job, in the first second after the shot, was to remain in position, observe what she could observe, and be ready for a second shot if required. The bullet was in the air. It was moving at 2,950 feet per second at departure, which was 899 meters per second. It was already decelerating, not dramatically, because the .408 Che attack cartridge is specifically designed for high ballistic coefficient that minimizes velocity loss over distance, but measurably. By the time it crossed the 1,000-meter mark, half a second after departure, it would be moving at approximately 798 meters per second. At 2,000 meters, approximately 1.4 seconds into its flight, it would be at 680 meters per second. At 3,000 meters, 2.2 seconds, it would be crossing into transonic territory, where the aerodynamic behavior of projectiles becomes less predictable. The 305-grain solid brass bullet, with its high sectional density and optimized ogive profile, was specifically designed to remain stable through this transition. Vasquez had verified this in her personal range testing at 3,000 meters. The group dispersion increased from 0.24 MOA at 2,000 meters to 0.51 MOA at 3,000 meters, still fully within acceptable parameters. At 3,500 meters, 2.9 seconds into the flight, the bullet would be moving at approximately 560 meters per second, subsonic. It had passed through the transonic zone. Its behavior from this point was governed by subsonic aerodynamics, which were actually more stable than the transonic transition zone, provided the bullet maintained its gyroscopic stability, which the 1 in 13 twist of the Lilja barrel had been specifically chosen to ensure. At 4,000 meters, the bullet would be moving at approximately 490 meters per second. It had been in the air for 3.9 seconds. It had 218 meters left to travel. In those final 0.9 seconds, it would cross the near-target wind zone, the eddy. Whether a gust was occurring at that moment was the one variable that Vasquez could not calculate in advance, only estimate. She had weighted her wind compensation for the most probable condition based on the eddy pattern she had observed. She had made the best decision possible with the available data. The bullet crossed the final 200 meters. The impact happened at 0608 hours, 14 seconds. Impact, Martinez said. His voice had the quality of someone who had trained themselves to remain informational in moments that wanted something else from them. Impact confirmed. Target is down. Target is down. He is not moving. Vasquez exhaled. She remained behind the scope for another 4 seconds, observing. The courtyard was still. The figure who had been standing in the eastern portion was no longer standing. The compound showed no immediate response, no movement in the visible doorways, no figures emerging. The shot had not produced an audible report at this distance that would immediately register as gunfire to anyone in the compound. Copy, she said. Martinez, wind check. Eddy was low at time of shot. Near target was reading 1.8 kilometers per hour. Your compensation was slightly over. I'm estimating the bullet tracked approximately 12 centimeters left of your intended impact point, but still within the vital zone. Good first-round hit. A pause. That was a first-round hit at 4,218 meters. She said nothing. She began the process of preparing for a potential second shot, because until the exfiltration was confirmed and the team was clear, she remained on the position. This was not a moment for reaction. It was a moment for continued discipline. TOC. This is Overwatch Alpha. Martinez transmitted. Shot fired. Target acquisition confirmed. Single round. First shot impact. Requesting exfil confirmation. Park's voice came back within 4 seconds. Overwatch Alpha. TOC confirms. Exfil is green. Extraction team is moving. You have 18 minutes to pick up. Start your egress. Copy 18 minutes. Martinez looked at Vasquez. We need to move. She was already disassembling the rifle, her hands moving through the process with the automatic precision of someone who had rehearsed it 10,000 times. Bipod folded. Scope caps closed. Bolt removed and secured. Action into the case. Barrel disconnected and stowed. The entire process took 93 seconds. She stood, lifted the rifle case, secured it to her pack frame, and looked once more at the valley below. At the compound, 4,218 meters away, already beginning to show the first signs of activity as the occupants inside processed the fact that something had gone wrong in the courtyard. She turned and began moving toward the egress route. The extraction was clean. The team reached the pickup point with 4 minutes to spare, the vehicles appearing from a fold in the terrain with the quiet efficiency of an operation that had been planned and rehearsed until every element moved like clockwork. Vasquez climbed into the rear vehicle without ceremony, secured her equipment, and sat with her back against the armor plate as the convoy moved away from the valley at controlled speed, fast enough to create distance, slow enough to avoid the dust signature that would be visible from observation points. Nobody spoke in the vehicle for the first 10 minutes. This was standard. The immediate post-shot period was not a time for conversation, because the psychological transition from the absolute focused stillness of a shot to the active, moving reality of exfiltration required space. Vasquez had learned this early. The mind needed time to decompress from the kind of concentration that extreme long-range shooting demanded, the kind that excluded everything outside the shot for the duration of its execution, and then had to be released all at once when the shot was over. She sat with the rifle case across her knees and looked out the small armored window at the landscape moving past. Desert rock, pale and ancient, indifferent to everything that had just happened in the valley behind them. Martinez, sitting across from her, caught her eye. He said nothing. He held up a single finger. One shot. She looked at him for a moment, then looked back out the window. The debrief at Camp Lemonnier began at 1,400 hours and lasted 3.5 hours. It was conducted in the main TOC conference room with Commander Hargrove presiding and Lieutenant Commander Park managing the documentation. The full operational team was present, all of the senior enlisted and officer personnel who had been at the 0347 briefing 3 days earlier, plus the members of the extraction team and the overhead platform operators who had provided support during the mission window. The debrief followed standard format. Park walked through each phase of the operation: insertion, movement to firing position, preparation, execution, exfiltration, with the structured thoroughness of a trained operational planner. Every element was documented. Every deviation from the planned timeline was noted. Every observation from each team member was recorded. This was the unglamorous machinery of operational learning, the systematic conversion of experience into institutional knowledge. Vasquez presented the shooting sequence with the same technical precision she brought to everything: exact wind readings, exact firing solution parameters, the single 8-click adjustment made before the shot, the estimated impact point deviation from intended versus actual, the time from first observation of the target to shot. When she finished the technical presentation, the room was quiet for a moment in the way that had become familiar over the past 72 hours. The quiet of recalibration, of people adjusting their understanding of what was possible. Dominguez was the first to speak. He was not a man who was given to dramatic statements, and he didn't make one. He looked at Vasquez from across the table and said, in his flat, informational voice. For the record, that shot was a work of art. Several heads nodded around the table. It was not a celebration. It was an acknowledgement, the specific professional acknowledgement of people who understood enough about the difficulty of what had been done to recognize it accurately. Hargrove looked at his notes for a moment, then looked at Vasquez. The preliminary ballistic analysis from the on-site data you brought back puts the confirmed distance at 4,219 meters. He paused. That's the longest confirmed combat sniper engagement in recorded military history. It's the longest one we know about, Vasquez said. There may be others. There may be, Hargrove agreed. But this is the one in the record. He held her gaze. The mission was successful. The target is confirmed eliminated. The intelligence follow-on is already indicating disruptions to the logistics network that al-Rashidi managed. This was a significant result. The team executed well, Vasquez said. The insertion route held. The exfil corridor stayed clean. Martinez ran the spotting sequence without errors. The meteorological support from the TOC was accurate. She looked around the table. This was a team outcome. Dominguez very nearly smiled. That's the second time I've heard you deflect credit, he said. I'm not deflecting. I'm accurately assigning it. There's a difference between accurate credit assignment and false modesty, he said. What you did this morning was not a team event. The team built the platform. You made the shot. He paused. Those are both true at the same time. Vasquez considered this for a moment. Fair point, she said, which was the only concession she made. The formal recognition came 3 days later, in a ceremony that Vasquez would have preferred to skip entirely, but which she understood was not entirely about her. Hargrove had submitted the after-action documentation to Special Operations Command, and the response had been immediate, the kind of immediate that indicated the people reviewing it understood the significance of the data they were reading. Colonel Jameson arrived at Camp Lemonnier on the second day, flying in from his headquarters in Stuttgart on a C-17 that also carried 2 senior officers from SOCOM and a communication security specialist whose job was to ensure that the specific details of the engagement remained within the appropriate classification envelope. Jameson was 62 years old, lean and gray, with a specific kind of stillness that Vasquez associated with people who had long since stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. He had been the battalion commander who had first recognized what she was capable of during a training evaluation at Fort Bragg 11 years earlier when she had been a staff sergeant on her second deployment assignment, and he had been a lieutenant colonel watching a range qualification that he had expected to be routine. He had stood behind her for 20 minutes without saying anything, watching her put rounds through a 6-inch target at 1,500 meters in a 12-kilometer crosswind, and then had walked away and immediately begun making phone calls. He had been making phone calls on her behalf, in one form or another, ever since. She met him privately, before the ceremony, in the small office that Hargrove had made available. Jameson sat across from her with his hands folded on the table, looking at her with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had years of practice at assessing people accurately. "Tell me about the shot," he said. She told him. She gave him the technical version, the one she had given at the debrief, with all the specific figures and calculations. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she had always respected about him. When she finished, he nodded once. "Hargrove called me yesterday," he said. "He apologized for his initial response when I gave him your name." "He apologized to me directly," Vasquez said. "It wasn't necessary, but it was appropriate. He's a good officer." He said you told him the same thing. Jameson paused. He also said something else. He said that watching you work over those 72 hours changed his understanding of what preparation means. He said he thought he understood what meticulous looked like until he saw your preparation process. A pause. He said every senior NCO and officer on that base should see it before they conduct another sniper-supported operation. "The preparation methodology isn't anything I invented," Vasquez said. "It's an extension of principles that are available to anyone who takes the time to follow them through to their logical conclusions. Most people don't do that. Most people stop at the point where it gets inconvenient." Jameson held her gaze for a long moment. "That's the difference," he said quietly. "That's always been the difference." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small box, setting it on the table between them. SOCOM submitted this recommendation within 18 hours of reviewing the after-action report. Given the classification level, the formal ceremony will be private and limited attendance. He pushed the box toward her, but the record will reflect it correctly. Vasquez opened the box. Inside was the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration in the United States Army, awarded for extraordinary heroism in military operations against an armed enemy. She looked at it without expression. Then she looked at Jameson. "This is for al-Rashidi," she said. "This is for 17 attempts over 4 years and the one that ended it," Jameson said. "This is for making the mathematically impossible into the tactically achieved. This is for everything that led to that shot, not just the shot itself." She looked at the decoration for another moment. Then she closed the box and set it on the table. "I'd like the after-action report to note Martinez's contribution to the firing solution development," she said. "His meteorological analysis in the final 6 hours before the mission window was essential. Without accurate near-target wind data, my firing solution had significantly higher uncertainty." Jameson looked at her for a long moment. "Already noted," he said. "I anticipated that request. Then you know me reasonably well." "I've known you for 11 years, he said. "I know you well enough to know that you're already thinking about the next one." She held his gaze. "There's always a next one," she said. The ceremony was held in one of the smaller conference rooms, attended by the operational team, Jameson, the 2 SOCOM officers, and Commander Hargrove. It lasted 11 minutes, which was 4 minutes longer than Vasquez would have preferred. Hargrove read the citation in the formal military cadence that transformed even the most precise technical language into something that sounded like a different language, elevated and weightless at the same time. Jameson pinned the decoration. There were photographs taken for the classified record. There was no speech from Vasquez, because she had been specifically told that one was not required, and she had immediately declined to give one. Afterward, in the informal few minutes while people were gathering their things and the room was breaking down from ceremony into reality, Dominguez came to stand next to her. He did not immediately say anything, which he had come to understand was his way. He thought before he spoke, which distinguished him favorably from the majority of people she encountered. "I've been a shooter for 14 years, he said. "I've qualified to 2,000 meters. I've made shots in combat conditions that I'm proud of." He paused. "I want you to understand that what you did is not in a different category from what I do. It's not a different activity. It's the same activity, taken so far beyond where I've gone that I'm having trouble with the scale of it." Vasquez looked at him. "The scale is just distance," she said. "The principles are identical." "The principles are identical," he agreed. "But the application of them," he paused. "I've been trying to understand, since the debrief, where the gap is between what I do and what you did. And I think it's in the preparation. Not the method. I understand the method. It's in the depth of it. The degree to which you've followed every single principle to its absolute furthest conclusion, without shortcuts. That's most of it," she said. "The rest is years." "How many years?" She considered. "Since I was 16. She paused. 18 years of not accepting a result I couldn't explain. 18 years of tracing every miss back to its source and building the solution into the next preparation. 18 years of..." She stopped. The shot at 4,219 meters wasn't exceptional. It was the product of 18 years of preparation being applied to the right conditions. Dominguez was quiet for a moment. "That's the most humble thing I've ever heard anyone say about a world record." "It's accurate," she said. "Both things can be true." He extended his hand. She shook it. He held the grip for a moment. "You're going to do this again," he said. "Whatever the next one is. Somewhere, some distance, some conditions that don't work for anyone else." "Probably," she said. That evening, after the debrief and the ceremony and the various conversations that these events generated, Vasquez took the rifle apart. Not because it needed cleaning. She had field stripped and cleaned it the evening before with the same thoroughness she always applied. She did it because it was the ritual that ended a mission for her, the physical process of returning a precision instrument to its baseline state, the tactile confirmation that this particular sequence was closed. She worked in the preparation room, which had been cleared of its charts and calculations and returned to its standard configuration as a general-purpose utility space. The walls were bare now. All the topographic printouts, the meteorological data sheets, the trajectory calculations had been collected and secured in accordance with the mission's classification requirements. The room looked ordinary without them, lit by the same fluorescent light, smelling of the same combination of gun oil and desert dust that was present everywhere on this base. She laid the components out on the cleaning mat: barrel, action, stock, scope, bipod, and began with the barrel, running the first patch through and observing the residue on it with the same analytical attention she brought to everything. Single-shot engagement. The barrel was clean. She ran 3 more patches anyway, because the standard was the standard regardless of the evidence. Then the action, the bolt face, the firing pin channel, the trigger assembly. Martinez appeared in the doorway at some point during this process. He had a cup of tea, his default preference, which she had teased him about exactly twice early in their working relationship before concluding that the teasing was not worth the time it consumed. He set it near her elbow, in the same position that Dominguez had placed the coffee 2 days earlier, and sat down across from her. "How are you?" he said. It was a simple question, and he asked it with the directness of someone who actually wanted to know the answer rather than as a conversational filler. Martinez asked simple questions simply, which was one of the reasons she valued working with him. She considered her actual answer for a moment. "Tired," she said. "The preparation takes more out of me than the mission does. By the time I'm on the position, I've already spent everything. All I'm doing is executing what was built in the preparation." She ran a patch through the bolt face channel. "The mission itself is almost restful, by comparison." "You say that every time," he said. "Because it's true every time." He sipped his tea. She continued cleaning. The sounds were the small, specific sounds of precision maintenance. The soft draw of a cleaning patch through a bore, the click of a bolt face reassembly, the barely audible whisper of an oil-dampened rag along a stock surface. "What do you think the record will stand?" Martinez asked. "How long before someone else gets past 4,219? There are 3 or 4 shooters in the world operating at the level where it's physically possible," she said. "Given the right mission parameters, the right terrain, the right atmospheric conditions, it could happen in a year. It could happen in 20. She paused. "Records are outcomes. I don't think about them as targets. What do you think about them as?" "Data points. Evidence that a thing is achievable. The first confirmed shot at any distance is a proof of concept. It tells everyone who comes after that the physics work. That's useful information." "It's useful information that you generated," Martinez said. "The physics were always there," she said. "I just built the solution." He nodded, in the way of someone who had decided not to argue a point he considered under-argued. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the silence of 2 people who had shared enough difficult hours that silence between them didn't require filling. After a while, Martinez said, "Dominguez came to find me after the ceremony. He had questions about the spotting methodology, the wind station triangulation approach." "What did you tell him?" "I told him the approach came from your notes from the CUNA deployment, that you've been developing the multi-station wind triangulation for valley terrain since 2019. He paused. He asked if you'd be willing to write it up formally, for the advanced sniper course curriculum. Vasquez considered this while she reassembled the bolt. "Tell him to send the request through official channels," she said. "If it goes through the right process, it'll get incorporated correctly. If I just hand him notes, it might get used wrong. That's practical. Most things are." 3 weeks later, when the mission classification had been partially lifted to allow specific elements to be shared within the special operations community, and when the ballistic data from the 4,219-meter engagement had been reviewed by the NRL precision team at Fort Benning and verified to 4 significant figures, the report began to circulate in the way that significant events circulate in the small, interconnected community of people who do this particular kind of work. Vasquez was at Fort Bragg for a curriculum review meeting when she first understood the scope of what the shot had meant to people outside the operational team. She was in one of the ranges at the Special Operations Training Complex, running qualification evaluations on 3 candidates for a long-range sniper course, when the senior training officer, a master sergeant named Delgado who she had met briefly at a training conference 2 years earlier, brought a younger soldier to the range and introduced him as Specialist Torres, a recent addition to the division who had requested the long-range course qualification. Torres was 23 years old, compact and serious, with the over-precise posture of someone who had been in the army long enough to have developed professional bearing but not quite long enough to have relaxed into it. He was carrying a qualification rifle that was well-maintained and showed evidence of careful personal attention. Good sign. He looked at Vasquez with a specific expression of someone who was trying very hard to look as if they were not looking at someone they had heard considerable things about. Vasquez had seen this expression before, in various versions, on various faces. She was accustomed to it. She was not entirely comfortable with it, because it required her to occupy a role, the legendary figure, the record holder, the reference point, that she found reductive. She was a shooter. She solved problems. The rest was accumulated data about what happened when you applied enough precision to enough variables. Specialist Torres, she said. What's your longest confirmed shot? He blinked. 840 meters, Sergeant. What's your current limitation? He thought about this, which was already a point in his favor, because many people simply named their longest shot rather than understanding the question. Wind reading, he said. I can make accurate shots out to about 1,000 meters in stable conditions. When the wind gets complex, I lose confidence in my solution. Why? I'm not always sure which reading to trust when they're inconsistent. Which wind station data do you weight most heavily in a multi-zone environment? Another pause. The station nearest the target. Sometimes. Why would that sometimes be wrong? He thought about it. Because the bullet spends more time in the earlier zones. So a sustained wind in the middle zone has more effect than a brief wind near the target. Vasquez looked at him directly for the first time since the introduction. That's correct. The wind exposure is weighted by time, not by proximity. A steady 8 km/h wind that the bullet flies through for 2 seconds has 4 times the lateral effect of the same wind speed for half a second near the target. She paused. Who taught you to think about it in terms of time exposure? I read your paper, Torres said. The one in the SOF Academic Journal. The section on trajectory-weighted wind compensation. A very brief silence. That paper is classified, Vasquez said. I have clearance, Sergeant. I requested access specifically because he stopped himself. I requested access because I read the after-action summary about the recent operation in Afghanistan. The distance figure. I wanted to understand how it was possible. The paper was referenced in the footnotes of the preliminary ballistic analysis. He paused. I've read the paper 3 times. Vasquez studied him for a moment. Behind her, she could sense Delgado watching this exchange with the careful attention of someone deciding what it meant. What did you take from it? She asked. That extreme distance shooting isn't a talent problem, Torres said. That's the thing that hit me hardest. The way you describe it, it's a data problem. It's a precision problem. It's a discipline problem. He paused. I can work on data, precision, and discipline. I don't know if I can develop a talent I might not have, but I can follow a methodology. A pause. I've been trying to apply the wind weighting approach to my qualification shoots for the past 3 weeks. My accuracy in complex wind environments has improved. By how much? My group size at 1,000 meters went from 1.2 MOA average to 0.7 MOA in variable wind conditions. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. Nearly halved in 3 weeks by applying a single methodological adjustment. That was a meaningful number. That was the kind of number that told her something specific about the quality of the person producing it. Come with me, she said. She walked to the firing line and indicated the position next to her own. Show me your natural point of aim setup on a 1,000-meter target. Torres moved into position with the earnest efficiency of someone who had been practicing this exact thing. Vasquez watched him settle behind the rifle, watched his body geometry as he aligned with the target, watched the small adjustments he made without being instructed to, watched where his hands rested and where the tension was and where it wasn't. She watched for 30 seconds. Then she said, "You're holding your left shoulder slightly high. You're fighting the natural point of aim rather than adjusting position to achieve it. Torres adjusted without comment. The shoulder came down. The body alignment changed. She watched him settle into the corrected position. Better, she said. Now tell me what you feel. Less tension in the left shoulder, he said. The rifle feels more stable. Less like I'm holding it in place and more like it's just sitting there. That's what natural point of aim feels like, she said. When it's right, the rifle wants to be there. You're not maintaining it. You're just not disturbing it. He was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. Then he said, "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "The shot in Afghanistan." He paused. "The 4,219-meter shot. When you broke the trigger, were you certain it was going to hit?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment. She looked downrange, at the 1,000-meter targets arranged in the still air of the North Carolina morning. She thought about the question honestly, because it deserved an honest answer. "I was certain that I had done everything within my capability to maximize the probability of a first-round impact," she said. "I was certain that the data was correct. I was certain that the firing solution was as good as I could make it." She paused. "Certain that it would hit?" "No. At 4,219 meters, with the variables in that environment, certainty is not available. What you have is the best possible preparation and the discipline to execute correctly, and then accept whatever the physics produce." Torres absorbed this. That's a different way of thinking about confidence. Confidence isn't certainty, she said. Confidence is trusting the preparation and executing without hesitation. Hesitation is more dangerous than uncertainty. Uncertainty is just the honest condition of operating in the real world. She paused. You can be uncertain and still be precise. The uncertainty is about the outcome. The precision is about the execution. They are not in conflict. He thought about this. She could see him thinking about it. Not performing thoughtfulness, but actually integrating something, adding it to an internal framework that was clearly being actively built. She recognized the quality of attention. She had seen it in the mirror 18 years ago, in the back of a truck on a date road in Montana, turning over something her father had said about wind reading until it resolved into something she could use. "That's going in my notes," Torres said quietly. "Write it down in your own words," she said. "If you write it in mine, you'll be copying the surface. If you restate it, you'll understand whether you've actually understood it." He looked at her. "That from your paper. Section 2, paragraph 4. Almost word for word." She looked at him. "Then you have understood it." Delgado found her afterward, when Torres had moved to the far range for his qualification sequence and the morning had opened up into the settled quiet of a training day running its ordinary course. "Is good," Vasquez said, before Delgado could ask. "His fundamentals are solid. The wind reading limitation is real, but it's addressable. He's already begun addressing it correctly. His learning rate is high. I'd recommend him for the advanced course." "I thought you would," Delgado said. He paused. "He's been following your published work for about a year. He found the reference paper through the ballistic analysis the same way he told you. He requested clearance, and they gave it to him because his evaluations were strong enough to justify the access." A pause. "He told me before today that the reason he requested the long-range course was because of the report from Afghanistan. Because he read the distance figure in the summary and decided that if that was achievable, the things he thought were the limits of what was possible in this work were not actually limits." Vasquez said nothing for a moment. She watched Torres at the far range, settling into position for his qualification shot. "He said the paper changed how he thinks about the work," Delgado continued. "He said it's not the same discipline to him that it was before he read it. He said it's larger now." Vasquez watched Torres take his shot. Through the range spotting scope, she could see the impact. Center of the group, clean, well executed. 840 meters, and he'd made it look straightforward. "Tell him the wind-weighting approach needs to be practiced at distance before he relies on it," she said. "The theory is clear, but there's a calibration period when you first start applying it where your confidence outruns your accuracy. He needs to extend his testing distance gradually. Don't let him try to apply it at extreme range before he's confirmed the methodology at incremental distances." "I'll tell him," Delgado said. "And tell him to read the second paper as well. The Coriolis section. His operating at distances where it starts to matter." I'll tell him that too. She turned away from the spotting scope. He's going to be very good, she said. Not as a compliment, but as an assessment. A data point. The specific satisfaction of a methodology showing its replicability. She flew back to Lemonnier that night, because the current operational tempo did not leave extended windows for anything that was not directly mission-related, and there were 3 new intelligence assessments waiting for review that Martinez had already begun working on in her absence. The world did not pause for ceremonies or curriculum meetings or conversations on training ranges. It continued in its relentless way, producing new problems that require the same systematic approach, the same careful attention, the same discipline applied to new variables in new environments. The flight east crossed the darkness of the Atlantic and then the ancient, patient darkness of Africa, and Vasquez spent most of it in the focused middle distance that soldiers occupy when they are neither quite asleep nor quite awake, resting the conscious mind while the deeper, more continuous part continued its work, cycling through the meteorological data she had reviewed before departure, the new terrain assessments, the intelligence summaries that described movements and patterns in the slowly changing geometry of the ongoing operational environment. The current confirmed world record for a combat sniper engagement was 4,219 meters. She was already thinking about the next problem. Not the next record. Records were outcomes, data points, evidence that a thing was achievable. The next problem. The next set of variables that would require a systematic solution. The next terrain, the next atmosphere, the next chain of calculations that would have to be built from first principles because the standard approaches had already been determined to be insufficient. There was always a next one. She cleaned her rifle on the fold-down table in the transport aircraft, with the small, precise sounds of maintenance, while Africa scrolled past 30,000 feet below and the stars that were visible through the small overhead window were the same stars that had been above that ridge in Afghanistan 3 weeks ago, unchanged and indifferent and burning with the same ancient precision they always had. She ran the last patch through the ball and held it up briefly in the aircraft's cabin light. Clean. The ball was clean. The system was in its baseline state, ready. She reassembled it. Ghost never rests. The intelligence assessment waiting on Vasquez's desk when she landed at Lemonnier was marked with the priority flag that meant it had been reviewed at 2 levels above the standard operational threshold before being forwarded to her specifically. Martinez had left it centered on the work table with a single sticky note attached that read only, Eastern Corridor. Similar geometry. See page 7. She read the note, removed it, set it aside, and opened the assessment. Page 7 contained a topographic analysis of a valley system in the northeastern borderlands. Different country, different target architecture, different political context, but the same essential geometry that she recognized from 6 years of studying broken terrain. A long valley with high ridge lines, a compound at the eastern end, a firing position that would require engagement at a distance the preliminary analysis had not yet measured because the analyst preparing the document had stopped at the point where standard sniper capability ended and written the phrase beyond effective range, alternative engagement method required. She crossed out the phrase with a single clean line. Then she pulled out a fresh calculation sheet and began. 3 days after her return, Torres sent a formal written request through the training channel for additional guidance on the trajectory-weighted wind compensation methodology. It was accompanied by a field data log showing 42 practice engagements conducted over the 18 days since their range conversation, each one annotated with a pre-shot wind readings from multiple stations, the applied compensation, and the measured impact deviation. The log was precise and methodical and showed a learning curve that was steep in the best possible way, not the steep curve of early enthusiasm that flattened quickly, but the steady, disciplined curve of someone who had understood the method well enough to apply it consistently and was now refining the application through systematic repetition. Vasquez read through the log twice. She made 7 marginal notes in the narrow white space Torres had left at the edge of each entry, small corrections, observations, one place where he had overcompensated because he had weighted the near-target station too heavily in a crosswind condition, another where his interpolation between station readings had been slightly off in a way that was technically correct but practically aggressive for his current calibration level. She also noted 3 instances where he had made correct adjustments that were not in the paper, that came from his own analysis of the data patterns he was accumulating. Those 3 instances told her more than all 42 combined. She wrote her response in the same marginal notation format he had used, because she believed that comments embedded in the actual work were more useful than separate feedback documents. At the bottom of the last page, she added a single paragraph. Your instinct in sessions 31, 36, and 40 regarding the Mid-Valley Station weighting and channel terrain was correct and is not covered explicitly in the published methodology. You derived it from the data. That is the right process. The methodology in the paper is a starting framework. What you build on top of it through systematic observation is yours. Develop it. Document it. It will eventually be better than mine for certain terrain types because you will have more time to refine it for those conditions. She sent it through the secure training channel and returned to the Eastern Corridor assessment. Dominguez appeared at the preparation room on the 4th evening after her return, this time without the pretext of coffee. He came with a printed copy of Torres's qualification assessment, which had been routed to him as the senior training oversight officer for the division's sniper program. He set it on the table in front of her with the expression of someone delivering good news. He qualified at 1,100 meters in adverse wind conditions, Dominguez said. His group dispersion at 1,100 was 0.65 MOA. His wind compensation accuracy was rated at 91% by the evaluation protocol. He should be at 1,200 by his next evaluation, Vasquez said. His limiting factor now isn't the wind methodology. It's platform stability at extended distance. His bipod setup needs adjustment for the angle he's carrying. I noticed it on the range but didn't have time to address it. Tell his primary instructor to watch his bipod leg extension on uneven terrain. Dominguez noted this. He asked if he could correspond with you directly, as a mentor correspondence. He already is, she said. I responded to his field log this morning. Dominguez looked up. He didn't mention that in the request. He submitted the request before I responded. The correspondence already exists. The formal channel is redundant. She looked at Dominguez. Tell him to keep sending the logs. Monthly is sufficient. Don't let him over-communicate. That's its own discipline problem. Dominguez wrote this down as well. Then he set the pen down and looked at her in the direct, unhurried way he had developed over the past several weeks. You know what you're doing with him, don't you? He said. It was not quite a question. I'm responding to his data logs, she said. You're building a methodology transmission, Dominguez said. You're ensuring that what you've developed doesn't stay with one person, that it propagates. He paused. Jameson told me that you've had 4 other shooters in the past 8 years who you've done this with. Formal and informal mentorship through the training channels. All 4 of them are currently in senior operational sniper roles. Vasquez said nothing for a moment. The methodology is only useful if it's practiced, she said. I can't be in more than one place. The work requires more than one person. That's what I mean, Dominguez said quietly. You're not thinking about the record. You're thinking about the work, about who carries it forward. She looked at the Eastern Corridor assessment on the table in front of her, at the fresh calculation sheet with its early annotations, the chain of interdependent variables beginning to resolve into a structure that would eventually become a firing solution for a problem that hadn't been assigned yet, for a mission window that might open in 3 weeks or 3 months or might not open at all, but that would be ready when it did. The record belongs to a moment, she said. The methodology belongs to everyone who learns it. Outside, the desert was cooling toward another night, the temperature dropping with the reliable physics of high-altitude arid terrain, the stars emerging with the same ancient indifference they always showed. Somewhere to the east, in a valley that she had never seen in person but knew better than most places she had stood, the geometry waited, the ridgelines and the compound and the long, patient distance between them, holding its variables in suspension until someone arrived with the preparation to resolve them. She picked up her pencil. She went back to work.